On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., the state of Florida executed Theodore Robert Bundy by electric chair. Outside the prison, crowds celebrated. Some held signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Others wore T-shirts mocking his final moments. But behind the spectacle lay a far darker story, one that would forever change how America understood evil. Ted Bundy confessed to murdering 30 women across 7 states between 1973 and 1978. Some investigators believe the true number could exceed 100. But numbers alone cannot capture the horror of what Bundy represented. A charming, intelligent man who hid monstrous depravity behind a smile. This is the story of how one man terrorized a nation, evaded justice twice, and became the case study that revolutionized criminal psychology. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But the circumstances of his birth would cast a shadow over his entire life. For the first 3 years of his life, Bundy lived with his maternal grandparents, who raised him as their son to avoid the social stigma of childbirth outside wedlock. Family and friends were told that his mother was his older sister. The truth about his parentage, that he was illegitimate, would become a source of deep shame and confusion for young Ted. The deception surrounding Bundy's birth created a fundamental instability in his sense of identity. When he eventually discovered the truth, it shattered his understanding of who he was and where he came from. In 1950, Ted's mother, Louise, moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she eventually married Johnny Bundy. Ted took his stepfather's name, but by his own later accounts, he never felt he truly belonged. By the time he was a teenager, Bundy already exhibited troubling signs. He recalled being antisocial, wandering streets looking for discarded pornography, and peeping through windows. He had an extensive juvenile record for theft that was dismissed when he turned 18. Yet to the outside world, Ted Bundy appeared normal, even exceptional. By 1972, Bundy had graduated from college and showed great promise in a career in law or politics. He was articulate, intelligent, and devastatingly charming. He worked at a suicide crisis hotline, where he met crime writer and Rule, who would later pen the definitive book about him, The Stranger Beside Me. Elizabeth Klopfer became perhaps Bundy's most well-known girlfriend. They began a 6-year relationship in 1969 after meeting in a Seattle bar. She was a single mother who struggled with alcoholism. She said Bundy was warm and loving and he took care of her. But beneath this facade, something sinister was taking root. Bundy was introduced to pornography at a very young age and became addicted to hardcore, violent pornography. His addiction grew over the years, requiring increasingly violent and graphic material. Eventually, these fantasies were no longer sufficient. They had to become reality. Bundy killed his first definitively known victim in February 1974 in Washington. The victim's name was Linda and Healy, a 21-year-old who gave the ski report on local radio. During 1974, women college students in the Washington, Oregon areas disappeared at the rate of about 1 per month. The victims shared striking similarities: young, attractive, with long brown or blonde hair parted in the middle. Bundy's method became increasingly sophisticated and terrifying. He would employ various ruses designed to lure victims to his vehicle. In many cases, he wore a plaster cast on one leg or a sling on one arm, then requested assistance carrying something to his car, where he had prepositioned a weapon, usually a crowbar. Bundy had removed the passenger seat from his tan Volkswagen Beetle, leaving an empty space on the floor for his victim to lie out of sight as he drove away. Carol Durant was one of the few who escaped. She later testified, "He seemed so nice, so normal. He told me he was a police officer. By the time I realized something was wrong, he had handcuffs. I fought. I jumped out of that car and I ran for my life." Bundy was first convicted in 1976 for her kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But Bundy's reign of terror had only just begun to unravel. In August 1974, Bundy was accepted to attend the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City. Homicides and missing persons began in that area. The pattern was unmistakable. Bundy would move to a new location, and women would start disappearing. Idaho, Colorado. The body count climbed. He frequently revisited the bodies of his victims, grooming and performing sex acts on the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made further interactions impossible. FBI agent William Hagmeyer, who interviewed Bundy extensively, recalled, "Bundy told me that after a while, murder is not just a crime of lust or violence. It becomes possession. The victim becomes a part of you, and you are forever one. The grounds where you kill them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them." In 1977, Bundy faced murder charges in Colorado for the killing of Karen Campbell, but he had no intention of standing trial. In June 1977, during a preliminary hearing in Aspen, Colorado, Bundy was left alone at one point. He let himself out of a second-story window, jogged down Main Street, and disappeared. The FBI quickly began to gather and disseminate Bundy's criminal history. A $100,000 reward was offered for his capture. He was found days later, but it wouldn't be his last escape. 7 months later, Bundy escaped again by losing 35 pounds and wriggling through a lighting panel in his maximum security cell. This time he wouldn't be caught so quickly, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Bundy traveled to Ann Arbor, Michigan, then drove a stolen car to Atlanta, before arriving in Tallahassee, Florida by bus on January 8, 1978. The Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University was the epicenter of campus social life, located near dormitories and popular student hangouts. Detective David Brand, a first responder, later recalled, "At around 4 a.m. on January 15, 1978, I received a call telling me there had been multiple homicides at the Chi Omega sorority house. I was stunned. These could be my own daughters." Bundy entered the Chi Omega house through a back door with a faulty lock. He beat Margaret Elizabeth Bowman with a piece of wood as she slept and choked her with a nylon stocking. He entered the room of Lisa Janet Levy, beat her unconscious, bit her on the buttock, and sexually assaulted her with a hairspray bottle. He also attacked Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, who survived. The entire attack lasted approximately 15 minutes. 2 women were dead. 2 more were critically injured. Survivor Kathy Kleiner later said, "I never saw his face. When the defense asked if I could identify him, I had to say no. But I wanted to help put the nail in the coffin, to help the other girls who couldn't." Less than an hour after the Chi Omega attacks, Bundy entered another home a few blocks away and attacked Cheryl Thomas, a dance major. She was found beaten and in a coma. On February 9, 1978, Bundy kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a junior high school student who disappeared in the middle of the school day. She would be his youngest victim and his last. Around 1:30 a.m. on February 15th, a Pensacola police officer noticed a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically and ordered it to pull over. Bundy resisted but was eventually taken into custody. The monster was finally caged. Bundy's trial began in June 1979 and was covered by 250 reporters from 5 continents. It was the first trial to be televised nationally in the United States. Bundy chose to represent himself, demonstrating both his intelligence and his narcissism. According to a member of his defense team, Bundy sabotaged the entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. All that mattered to him apparently was that he be in charge. The prosecution's most damning evidence was a bite mark left on Lisa Levy's body. Forensic odontologists matched it conclusively to castings of Bundy's teeth. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours before convicting Bundy on July 24, 1979, of the Bowman and Levy murders, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary. Judge Edward Cowart imposed death sentences for the murder convictions. In a stunning moment, he addressed Bundy directly. "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It's a tragedy to this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself." In January 1980, Bundy stood trial for the kidnapping and murder of Kimberly Leach. He was convicted again and sentenced to death. For the next decade, as Bundy sat on death row, psychologists studied him intensely, trying to understand what created such a monster. According to psychological research, Bundy exhibited traits of antagonism. He was deceptive, manipulative, callous, exploitative, and arrogant. He was classified as a high-factor psychopath. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit prepared a psychological assessment of Bundy. Agents Howard Tetton and Robert Ressler were part of a groundbreaking behavioral analysis unit set up to study the behavior and psychological makeup of criminals. Dr. Thomas Whittaker, a psychology researcher, explained, "Bundy had the core characteristics of a psychopath yet managed to succeed in exploiting others while avoiding punishment through traits of high conscientiousness. He was what we call a successful psychopath." Forensic psychologists identified psychopathy as the central personality construct behind Bundy's behavior. His charm and intelligence allowed him to avoid suspicion for years, demonstrating how some psychopaths blend seamlessly into society. As his execution date approached, Bundy attempted one final manipulation. He tried to bargain, offering to confess to his crimes in exchange for more time. Ultimately, his ploy did not work. Days before his execution, Bundy confessed on tape to authorities to 30 murders in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and Florida between 1973 and 1978. However, authorities suspect he may have killed many more, as many as 100. In his final interview before execution, Bundy claimed, "The most damaging kind of pornography is that which involves violence and sexual violence. Those of us who are so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kind of inherent monsters. We are your sons and husbands. We grew up in regular families." Forensic psychologists dismissed this claim as self-serving manipulation. Bundy was attempting to shift blame and avoid responsibility. Classic psychopathic behavior. The truth is far more complex. On January 24, 1989, the state of Florida executed Ted Bundy by electric chair at Florida State Prison for the murder of Kimberly Leach. Outside, the crowds cheered. Ted Bundy's case transformed American criminal justice. His crimes contributed to the development of criminal profiling, particularly by the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. His profile as a psychopathic sexual predator helped law enforcement refine their approach to identifying serial killers. Bundy's crimes led to the strengthening of national databases for missing persons and violent offenders, improving law enforcement's ability to track and solve crimes. But perhaps his most enduring legacy is what he taught us about the nature of evil itself. Ann Rule, author of The Stranger Beside Me, wrote, "Bundy was a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure from another human's pain and the control he had over his victims, to the point of death and even after." Bundy once described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. For once, he was telling the truth. His victims, Linda and Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Melissa Smith, Laura Am, Deborah Kent, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Liverson, Lynette Culver, Susan Curtis, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and so many others whose names we may never know, deserve to be remembered not as statistics, but as daughters, sisters, friends, and individuals whose lives were stolen far too soon. Evil does not always announce itself with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it arrives with a charming smile, a helping hand, and a Volkswagen Beetle. The story of Ted Bundy is a reminder that monsters walk among us, and they often wear the most convincing masks. This documentary is dedicated to the memory of all those who lost their lives to Ted Bundy's violence, and to the survivors who found the courage to testify and help bring him to justice. Follow for more true crime stories from the darkest corners of the world.